Thank you all for joining Protect Our Kids' Privacy, another edition of our Talking Data series in honor of Data Privacy Week 2024. Data Privacy Week is an international effort to empower individuals, safeguard data, and enable trust. It originated as Data Privacy Day, but we expanded it into a full week in 2022. And this year's theme is Take Control of Your Data, which is all about small, actionable steps that you can take to be more data privacy aware. And with that, I will kick it off to the National Cybersecurity Alliance's Executive Director, Lisa Plagmeyer.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We have the pleasure of having Kalinda Reyna with us, the Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer at LinkedIn, who's also a parent and very interested in children's privacy. So let's start there. Help set the stage for us. What's the latest with children's privacy, and why is this important to you as a parent and somebody who works in technology?
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Lisa. Happy Data Privacy Week to everyone. It's always nice to have this week where we take a little bit of time out and just kind of think about how to handle our data and how to protect ourselves a bit, but also just why the work that we do in this space, so many of us, is important. So thank you for that. As you mentioned, I am a mom of three. I have a 15-year-old, so right in the heart of the teen angst, a 12-year-old, so middle schooler, both boys, and then my daughter is 8. So I've got the full range of tech issues with my kids, and I actually really have always had an interest in kids' privacy. My career actually started during working on COPPA at Center for Democracy and Technology as an intern. So was really interested in that legislation when it was first started, and then ended up being at Nintendo, which is obviously a company that cares about kids' privacy, in the days when the most exciting thing you could do was play with a friend can chat on your DS. So times have changed. And then went to Apple, where I noticed in my own life that I was struggling with the issue of my children being able to use their iPads without tying to my account. And I raised this up, and we were able to convince the execs that we should really start a family account system. And so worked on designing that and putting that in place. And now that I'm at LinkedIn, I happily treat my fascination in kids' privacy issues as a side project, because I really focus on it as a mom and the issues that I see in my kids' daily lives. And quite honestly, the challenges for me as a parent and the challenges for them as kids growing up with this tech, which they are now completely, they don't have a choice to avoid, especially after COVID, because the schools have integrated tech so deeply as a result of those homeschool times and when we were all remote, that it's really hard to escape that. And living here in the Silicon Valley, I just see those pressures for my kids to constantly want the next tech gadget, compare it with their friends, and that pressure gets really strong in middle school when it seems most parents end up giving their kids a phone or some other device that can track them. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's unavoidable by the time you get to that age. Not just because they're under peer pressure, but because we want to know where they are and what they're doing and have ways to, make sure we know when practice is running late, or, how to find them when we're picking them up somewhere, all those things. I don't think many of us as parents feel like we really have our arms around this. It feels unmanageable. So what are sort of the most common errors we're making as parents? Like, what could we be doing better to manage not just our kids' data, but frankly our own data too?
Yeah, such a good question. And, as someone in tech, I myself not going to be suggesting any new apps to download or things like that. I actually think as a parent, the first place we all need to be starting and doing more of is talking to our kids about their data and their tech. And then secondly, exemplifying it ourselves, which I will say I am terrible at and constantly working at. But my kids, from the age of, as soon as I could talk, I was communicating to them what I was doing with tech so that they did not think that it was just something I had a relationship with because I'm on my phone a lot. that was more important than them, or that I was doing really fun things and ignoring them. I would consciously try to be like, mommy's responding to a work email now. And as they're growing older, I need to keep doing that. I actually came down this morning to our kitchen on my phone dictating a text, and my seventh grader's like, I said good morning, and I was like, oh my god, yes, 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 good morning, sweetheart. So I think it's a struggle for all of us, but I think it really does begin first and foremost with talking to our kids about the fact that, what data do you think is private about you? What do you think it's okay to share online? What would make you nervous about sharing with someone else? And then, of course, all of the things that we put in place, like family settings, to control what apps they have, and checking to see, I make my kids use technology in a public space in our home, meaning they are not allowed to have any tech in their bedrooms, or in a room with a closed door where no one else is. So they hate this, and it can be very annoying. However, I will say my husband has said to me multiple times what a good job I did with that, because it has allowed us, because he was not in favor of it, I should say. But it has allowed us to observe how they're interacting with the tech. Meaning, my middle schooler is allowed to come home and get on his iPad for 20 minutes when he gets home. And during that 20 minutes, the deal was, you need to be checking the news. Like, oh, you're checking the news, you're checking sports, you're doing your fantasy football. Okay. But you're not playing games, you're not doing, anything. This is just a little bit of downtime before you start your homework. And so having him in a public space has, one, been able to help us keep him to the time that he's supposed to be on it, and also see, like, walk by him. And if he suddenly turns his iPad, I'm pretty sure he's not looking at the news anymore. So we have a bit of a clue as to what might be going on. And then I start my conversation of asking questions. And with our older child, he is on, not only for school, so it's good to see that, but I can see that he's working on school and texting his friends. And I'll often comment on that to him of like, how is that going? You seem to be texting every 30 seconds instead of focusing on what you're doing. So I think it having them be in a public space opens conversations. It doesn't solve everything, but it does give you the opportunity to be more engaged with them in what they're doing.
I think we've forgotten about the concept of physical proximity to other people, and that old adage of, management by walking around. Like, it is really important to be able to see what they're doing. And actually, since you told us a year or two ago that that's the rule in your house, we share that a lot at our nonprofit when we're talking to parents, because I think as a concept, it makes a lot of sense to have your kids. I wish now that I'd have done that when my kids were younger. They're all in their 20s. That I'd have said, like, if you're going to be on your phone, it needs to be at the kitchen table or in the family room or someplace where I can.
Well, it's
see what's
annoying.
going on.
I'll say that Friday nights in our house are annoying, because that's when my high schooler gets on video games, and my husband and him are in the same room. So my husband works, and is trying to manage calls on his headphones while my son's screaming in the background. But
Mhm.
it does again open up that conversation with our son to, while he's on video games, to hear what they're talking a bit about. We only hear his side because he wears headphones, but to kind of be checking in and seeing what's going on.
Do you have any other recommendations for how parents and also teachers can teach kids to stay safe online?
Well, I think it's just a skill we're going to have to continuously help our children develop as both parents, educators, and others. And our jobs as parents is a little even more challenging, because we not only have to educate our kids, but we often have to educate relatives as well, and have conversations within our partnerships as to what everybody's comfort level is. So I think it starts with, the parents having a conversation first and foremost about comfort levels. I know my husband and I have different comfort levels around what to share about our kids. And so we've had a lot of that when they were younger, where we had to have some discussions around, well, what photos are appropriate to share and with whom and in what context, and what's the best way to do that. And now that the kids are older, we actually have told them that we won't post without their permission. So we actually talk to them. And I think engaging them when you're posting about why would we post this picture and share it with people, and who are we sharing it with, and who do we think the appropriate audience is for that, is all part of just training them to think about those questions for themselves as they get older and they start engaging with the tech. So I also really encourage parents to have a conversation with their kids around what data they share online, because most times they won't realize how much they are sharing online. So encouraging that of, well, when do you go online? What about when you do a Google search? Are you sharing anything then? What about when you're on a game texting with people? What are you sharing then? What if you're in a shared doc with a bunch of people from school for a project? Are you sharing anything then? And kind of walking them through thinking through some of that. And also, I love doing this with my kids, which is they tell me they want something on Amazon, and I tell them, well, go search for it. And then we look at what comes up in Amazon as recommendations for them. And they starting to make that connection between what I do and my actions online, how it plays out in some of the apps that I use, some of the ads that I see, so that they can start recognizing that whenever you're interacting online, there is data being collected about you and used, and you have to be thoughtful about how you want to present yourself online. It's another version of an identity, and I think sometimes we forget that.
Yeah, I think particularly children, because they tend to be very trusting and optimistic about the internet, and that's not the first thing on their minds when you hand them technology when they're little kids. They're not immediately thinking stranger danger, right? They're thinking about, oh, look at this thing, and I can do all these neat things with it. They tend to be naturally optimistic, and we don't want to change that in our children. That's a great trait to have, but that should make us more aware that that's what we're working against, is that sort of trust and optimism that they have that's innate. And that's what we've got to communicate, because that's kind of the default position, is they're looking at all the potential and the upside and the fun.
It is. And one of the things that I feel educators should know about is the fact that they're setting a tone for kids around sharing in the way that
Mhm.
they set assignments up or projects up. My daughter's, when she was in kindergarten, one of her first assignments was to um, do a tour, these were COVID days, of our house for her classmates. And I did actually reach out to the teacher to say,
That seems kind of intrusive. Yeah.
well, it was very intrusive, but on the other hand too, it was such an opportunity to, before you do something like that, talk to the kids about, we're in a class and we're getting to know each other, and how do we get to know each other? Maybe we could start with something other than your entire house, but like, maybe show your workspace and explain who you are. And we can do that in this setting because we're in a school setting and we know that we're with trusted people. And we wouldn't typically do this unless we were in a school setting, for example. Just giving some context to the behaviors that we're asking kids to participate in online is really important. And my daughter, for example, does a lot of online tutoring, and I tell her, like, it's okay to be on with this one adult one-on-one, but we're going to keep it on speaker so that we can all hear what those conversations are, because not every situation with an adult online is one that we can trust, right? So we have to
Yep.
make that
Yep.
decision together, you and me, listening to what you're doing online. So I think, that's even more important now, because so much of what our kids do, both with doctors, tutors, even some of their outside activities, is online, because COVID created that possibility for us, and so we have to talk to
Yep.
them a bit more about it.
Yeah, speaking of talking to people, have you ever had a conversation with somebody who maybe shared, you were talking about images earlier, shared images of your kids you wouldn't have rather that they shared, or tagging or things like that? That often comes up. Like, how do I say to somebody, like, please don't tag me in your photos?
Yes, I've had that situation multiple times within the family. First and foremost with my husband years ago, when he decided to post all of our family pictures from a trip to Europe. on Facebook. And I found out about it because a friend came up to me and was like, "Hey, saw you went to Europe. Wow, you guys had a great time. You went to it." And I was like, "Oh, wow, how did you know? That's so cool." Found out that my husband had made everything public instead. And then when I asked him about it, he's like, "Well, I was just trying to share for our parents." And I was like, "Well, okay, first of all, our parents don't want to see like 300 pictures of us from our trip, but so you should curate a little. But secondly, you don't make it public." So again, that's what partly developed the rule of we ask our kids before we post pictures of them. He doesn't always follow that rule, but we work on it. And now my kids call him out on it if he doesn't follow it. But also, I think the harder conversation is with grandparents and other parents, because first of all, grandparents feel they have the right to share anything about their grandkids they want. So I learned the hard way that by forwarding things on text to my in-laws, it ended up on Facebook. And we had to talk about the fact that, you know, for our own kids' protection, not just my personal interests, it's best that we not put things in public spaces, because, you know, again, my in-laws aren't very discerning about who they've connected with. It's just kind of anyone they know they connect with on Facebook, right? So different generational approaches to social media. And then I think with other parents, I've actually had, you know, they're awkward conversations, but when you engage in them in a way of, I'm coming from a perspective of trying to think through what's best for all of our kids, it can sometimes be helpful. So I think, you know, enough parents have heard me talk about this at this point where I live, so they usually know. But this was early in the, you know, preschool birthday party days, when I would say, you know, one picture of the kids as a group is great. But if you're going to post, you know, individual pictures of, I just ask that you not include my kids, you know.
Makes sense.
And you have the same option. Our school has a request from parents as well around whether photos can be shared of the kids. And, you know, I don't opt, I used to opt out completely. And I will say that's a detriment to your child in many ways, because then we'd have all these weird situations where like they wouldn't get to be in a photo or whatever. So
Right.
I ended up saying okay to it, but I did talk to the administration about what kind of photos might be appropriate to be sharing. And as long as it's within the parent group of the classroom, that all seems fine. But it was things that go out publicly or on Facebook pages that make me a little less comfortable.
So we have some good questions coming in, but before we shift to questions, I'm going to ask you to put your attorney hat back on for a minute and just share with us a little bit about what the trends are in the legal space, you know, new legislation, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, up until recently, really what we had was the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which only protected kids under 13 and still does. And the problem with that law for me as a parent is that it really only gives me the right to consent, and then everything stops after that. So once I get the choice of saying, okay, okay with my child interacting with your website and having their data collected, I no longer have control, though, over seeing what they're doing, what data is collected over time, how it's used, how it's impacting my child. So I think that's one of the challenges of COPPA, in addition to the fact that parental consent for those of us who are in two working parent families can be an extraordinary farce, because what my kids have figured out to do is go to the weakest link, my husband, and be like, "Daddy, this doesn't do anything here. Will you sign?" And he doesn't read all the stuff I read. And then they get the app, and then, you know, so on. So, you know, you're busy and you get the little ping and your kids are texting you, "Can you please approve? Can you please approve? Can you please approve?" And you're like, "Fine, I approve." Now what's happened? So, so I don't think it's effective in actually helping to do much more than create a bit of a tension before the kid can download something or start interacting. What has happened, though, in the past few years is the UK has passed the Age Appropriate Design Code, which sets out basic principles for companies that are interacting with kids around almost GDPR-like broad principles for interacting with children, and California has chosen to follow that as well. In the US, we also have several laws that are proposed, or state bills that are being proposed around managing kids, especially in the social media space. The challenge with Most US laws on this, however, is a First Amendment right for the children who would want to be able to engage in that social media without parent oversight or control. And so that's how that will likely get challenged here in the US. So where we're at is a place where you're really dependent on the companies you interact with having a principled approach to how they handle kids' data. The one of the nice things is there is more capability to be able to reach out if you want something deleted about your child. But the struggle really is that once things get out there, and typically it's not your child posting it, it's some other child posting it about your kid. It's incredibly hard to get the school to force that child to take it down or for the platforms to do it as well. And I've been through this situation several times with parents who have had bullying situations where things have been recorded or captured about their child and then shared, and then there's your hands are really tied as a parent unless you have the resources to know who to reach out to. So I think that's a challenge. I will say in India, they've passed a new privacy law, and that also helps to protect kids under 18. So the age is going from 13 in Europe, it's 16, and in India it's 18. So there is becoming a recognition globally of the fact that 13 doesn't really mean a whole lot. We need kids to be adults by the time they're managing some of this. So I hope to see further developments in that. But yeah, the laws aren't quite keeping up with where parents and educators need them to be.
Yeah, I would love to see that change as well. We have a few questions about how AI might be making things worse in this realm. So examples of how AI might be being used to exploit kids, or kids' images being manipulated with AI, things of that nature. Like, what are you seeing? Do you have any tips for parents now that AI is becoming more prevalent with the way people can impersonate other people and things like that?
Yeah, a couple things on this. First and foremost, think about the data going into AI. So from that perspective, this is another reason why I'm really careful about what photos my kids post, where they post it. Anything they're putting out there in the public domain, you should assume could be used in AI for whatever purposes, and even may be enhanced by AI search capabilities to be found. So I'd say be careful about the data that you're putting in. The other thing that I think is a real challenge is teaching our children and ourselves when we're interacting with AI. The New York Times recently had an article where you had to guess if the photo was AI or real, and I got every one of them wrong except for two. It's so hard. How do we get better at spotting the AI, and how do we give our kids clues for spotting the AI? And I think with our kids, it's another reason to remind them that when they are interacting with people online, make sure they are only interacting with people they know in real life. Because you can so easily be sucked into scams or other things, especially the teenagers, where you don't realize that the other end is not a real human being. And I give my boys this warning that's probably a little harsh, but I'm like, if a girl you don't know starts sending a cute girl you don't know starts sending you pictures, let's all talk. Like, that's not just randomly going to happen in the world. So if you're getting some cute girl who decided to reach out to you and you don't know her in real life, let's think about that, because there's tons of scams on that for young teenage boys. And there's also the concern that our daughters don't realize that so much of the imagery they may be absorbing is not real or might be enhanced by computers. And so I really think that's something we have to constantly, not just once, but constantly remind them of. And that's part of why having them sometimes in public places with you, interacting with the technology, gives you the opportunity to look over their shoulder and go, like, that Instagram photo of that
What are you
person,
doing?
that's not even like, that's not how a real woman looks, things like that that can help help them to recognize the fact that they're living in a world that's very manipulated and they have to be smart consumers. Same thing when I again go back to having my kids buy products on Amazon, forcing them to figure out what's promoted, what's not. How do I make a good decision about what I want to buy rather than the first thing that I see up here? So helping them dissect all the things that we as adults have begun to understand about being online. When we get a spam message, how do we know that it's a spam message? Think about what triggers it for you and start cluing your kids into that.
So here's a question about COPPA. You mentioned that. What should site owners do when the main purpose of their site is to reach an adult audience? I.e. an insurance company site is geared to adults. Are there any requirements under COPPA, even for these types of sites, not geared toward an under 13 audience?
Yeah. Well, the nice thing is when you're not geared towards an under 13 audience, you don't have to age gate. What your responsibility is to make sure that if you know you're dealing with a child, that you're instantly taking them off and not interacting with them anymore. So if you have a reason to know. So you do have a basic responsibility to, if someone has lied about their age and you get photos, for example, of their insurance claims or whatever the case may be, that you have steps internally to handle that and delete that customer and that account. But you don't have anything that you have to proactively gate kids for.
Okay. A couple people have asked, should we completely stop sharing our kids' faces online? We were talking a lot about images earlier. I have heard of people saying they just try to keep all photos off of social media. It feels like, you know, a monumental task to try and do that because we're visual and everybody is exchanging photos all the time, or people can take a screenshot of something. So what do you think is you've talked a lot about having open conversation, but where do you draw the line? You also talked about context. Is it a part of a classroom activity? And so, it's okay to have to exchange pictures maybe with kids that or how do you help parents navigate? Like, where do you draw that line? Is it even reasonable to think that you're going to keep every picture of your child off the internet?
No, that's not reasonable and probably actually impossible in this day and age. But what I would say is we should be much more thoughtful that when we share something, it's not in our control anymore. So first and foremost, think about the form in which you're sharing it. Are you sharing it on, for example, Instagram or Facebook, or are you sharing it, for example, in a text to your parents or in Google Photos where you've invited the people that you want to see it? So again, think about the audience and where you can restrict the audience to people that you know and trust and want to see that picture and that it matters to you that they see it. I think the second thing is thinking through why. And we don't ask ourselves enough that question. Why am I posting this? Is there a reason I'm posting this versus texting it to the grandparent or putting it in a family chat or whatever? And there's plenty of apps out there now to help parents share with the people they want to. But I think just really thinking about it because it's a step that we take that we didn't have to think about in the old days when we used to just pick up our film from Walgreens, right? Show whoever we were around,
doesn't mean you should.
Whoever was willing to look at our photos, we knew them, and they had a reason to look at them. So just recognize that there are settings, and it takes a little more work in a lot of the apps to restrict things to private or why you want to share it. My husband puts things on Strava, which drives me nuts, but his reasoning is, well, it shows that the kids accomplished this thing and we did this hike. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But we do discuss it as a family. And I think the person who's most hyper aware is my 8-year-old because she gets on him if he ever does any sharing without her permission.
That's interesting. That's awesome. I love that. Kalinda, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been really fantastic. I think we're out of time. This is a 30-minute webinar, isn't it? I have to check my calendar. Yep. We've been doing 30-minute ones all week this week for Data Privacy Week. So thank you very much. Super engaging. We had a ton of questions. Lucas, do you want to close us out, please?
Hey, thank you guys for joining. There are some additional resources listed here that will also be available on our website along with this recording by tomorrow morning. And just want to thank everyone again for joining us for another session of Talking Data. Please register on our website and join us again tomorrow for our next session. And we'll have another one to close us out at the end of the week on Friday as well. And please follow us on our social media and visit our website at StaySafeOnline.org. Thank you, Kalinda, for joining us, and thank you all for attending.